Hello, and welcome to WEXP's very first Radio Row panel. I'm Dan Sardero.
And I'm Lucas Davidson.
Today's show aims to educate and engage LaSalle students and the larger community with professionals in the radio industry. Joining us today are three professionals from the airwaves: Debbi Calton, Mike Vasilikos, and Paul Perrello, each one an established member of the radio industry and each an integral voice of Philadelphia.
Debbi Calton has been dominating the airwaves as a DJ in the Philadelphia market for 34 years. 24 of those years she's been at her current station, 102.9 WMGK, in the classic rock format. She's also a Grammy winner for her voice work on the children's album All About Bullies, Big and Small.
Mike Vasilikos is not only a seasoned on-air personality at 88.5 WXPN, but also the associate program director at the AAA station. Before that, he was also the program director at WTMD in Towson, Maryland. He hosts the new music show every Tuesday night at 8, and like me, he is a Bob Dylan fan.
Paul Perrello is an award-winning journalist. He has taught broadcasting and journalism at many institutions, including right here at LaSalle University. If you live in the Philly area, he has most likely delivered news to you while you're currently driving in your car. He currently works for CBS Radio and can be heard on 1210 WPHT. Most importantly, he started his career on WXP just like us. So let's get started. Yeah, I think you have the first question.
Yes, I do. So thank you all for coming. So all three of you are well-known radio personalities in the Philadelphia area. You've proven that you know your trade, and I think that's a testament to each one of your work. But let's take a step back for a moment. How did each one of you get started on the radio path, per se? Debbi, we can start with you.
Okay. I was almost a welder, but I ended up in radio just by a turn of circumstances. I was part of my college radio station, Guilford College, Greensboro, North Carolina, but always behind the scenes. I was very nervous and didn't like my voice, but I loved music. So I was doing that, but I needed to step back from college for just a little bit and try to figure out what I was going to do with my life. So I signed up for all these trade magazines, and I got welding, and I thought, oh, that's good to know a trade. And then I also got broadcasting school. So I knew my parents, I wanted my parents to still pay for something that had school in the title. So I decided to try broadcasting school first, which was the one that I went to was not good, but it got me started. I went and knocked on doors and took an internship at a small station, an AM daytime station in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I stayed for 2 years, and I did everything from writing copy, getting coffee. Then one day they said, "Do you want to try going on the air?" And I'm like, okay. And so, and then it just snowballed, and I was hooked.
Nice.
Wow.
For me, it started in a place just like this. I wanted to be a sportscaster in the worst way. I went to Towson University in Maryland and walked into the TV station, first day of school, and they said, "You won't be on air until you're a senior." And I said, "I'm way too impatient for that." So I went to the radio station, they gave me a shift. They said you could be on the radio, have your own show, Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., which I took right away. But as any college student knows, 8 a.m. on Saturday is a difficult time to get up and get going. But it led me to, within a couple of years, becoming music director and then running the college radio station. And my senior year, I'm like, how am I going to put this all together? How am I going to get a career doing this? Where I went to school, there was a student station, but there was an FM station that was licensed to the university, and it was this slow jazz, easy listening station that nobody listened to. So they brought in a new general manager at the time to flip the station, and he needed warm bodies, and he saw me working every day next door at the student station. Said, "Do you want to do Wednesday nights from 8 to midnight?" So I played a lot of Norah Jones and really sleepy stuff for a few months. Worked for free my first summer just so I could, get my foot in the door. And when he had a budget and could hire people, started working and networked my way into where I am now.
Nice.
In my case, I was a student here at LaSalle. My sophomore year, I decided to get involved in this little old radio station, WEXP. And I became a newscaster. No experience whatsoever, but they were looking for students to get involved in the campus radio station. So I started doing news. I don't remember when the shift was. The junior year, then, I became news director of WEXP. And by my senior year, I was the general manager of WEXP. Luckily, in my senior year, and you have to remember that there was no communication department here at LaSalle at that time. I was in first as a theater major, and after about 6 days of that, I said, not for me. And I didn't know what I was going to do, whether I was going to stay at LaSalle or transfer out. And there was talk about starting the communication department. So I stuck it out. And in my senior year, I got an internship. Happy to say that I was the school's first comm intern, and that was at WCAU-FM. And I was just like in awe of doing everything that they wanted me to do. And from there, I graduated, and no one wanted to hire me. I applied everywhere, and I landed at a radio station of all places, Maquoketa, Iowa. Now, I challenge you, if you can find Maquoketa, Iowa on a map, we're going out for dinner and I'm treating. Right? And I went out to the Midwest. I was there for about 9 months really on Main Street, USA, and that's where I really cut my teeth in real radio. I was getting a paycheck to be doing this. So that's how, and then I just moved up the ladder, came back to the Philadelphia market within a year. Ironically, I had no experience when I graduated. Being in the Midwest, I got a year's worth of experience, and I was back working in Philadelphia radio.
So it sounds like all of you got your start in college radio. So what was the difference between the industry then and the industry now? I'm sure there's a lot, but.
Well, the radio station that I started at in Charlotte, it was a luxury because it was an AM daytime station. You flipped the signal on at sunrise, you flipped it off at sunset. And sometimes that was such a short day that one person would work the entire shift. But it was a fantastic format. It was a precursor to progressive format, to a AAA format. It was actually anything goes. There were really no regulations. We did have a no Led Zeppelin rule, which killed me because I love Led Zeppelin.
Got all the lead out.
Yeah, no lead. But we played jazz. We played, at that time, this was in 1976, and there was a lot of crossover jazz coming out. We played folk, we played country, we played rock, we played everything. So I had a really wonderful experience at my first radio station. Formats started coming into play, shortly after that, and again, it was just a little luxury there, because once I started working for like a real commercial radio station, then you had a format. You still had a lot of leeway, which you do, in college stations, but there was a little bit more guidance. Now at MGK and at all commercial radio stations, there's a very strict format, and there needs to be. You have to be consistent. There has to be consistency when anybody pushes that button, for that radio station. Mike has a different experience because their format is broader at XPN, but there's still structure there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's like organized free form, if that makes any sense. Yeah, we have more leeway on some of that stuff. For me, the biggest change is competition, not just with radio stations, but other content providers. There was no social media, even as I was in college. There was no Facebook or Twitter. There was no Spotify. There was no Apple Music. There was no YouTube. So radio stations, music stations now, you're not just competing for people's ears on other radio stations, but you're competing for people's ears on other formats that are, still untested to a degree. So that's something that's always in our mind. And you're managing, people's personalities, not just on the radio, but through their social media feeds and stuff like that now, which can be challenging at times.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, management has changed a lot. I mean, it was not unusual working at a station where you could walk down the hall and you could see the program director and see the general manager. Now, because it's either eat or be eaten, there are all these behemoth media companies now. So in the case of commercial radio, CBS owns 6 stations in Philadelphia. We were just purchased by Entercom, and so Entercom bought the whole CBS package. And luckily for us, Entercom is still based in Philadelphia. It was always based in Philadelphia. But as these groups, and even in the case, Debbi with the Beasleys now coming in and purchasing Greater Media, maybe a little bit of that warm and fuzzy feeling that you had with Greater Media or CBS, that sort of changes because these major companies now, like iHeart, Clear Channel, they own the most stations across the country, and you have, in the case of Philadelphia, one market manager running all 6 stations. And so if you really need to get the attention of management, good luck, because he or she is really responsible for a number of different things. Whereas before, one general manager, one program director, and you could walk right down the hall and talk to them if you needed to.
You mentioned iHeartRadio. I just recently heard that they went bankrupt, unfortunately. So what are some maybe recent current challenges that may be facing radio stations all across the country, and obviously they can hit the big ones?
Yeah. One thing, in all due respect to the word bankruptcy, is that Ford, American Airlines, they all went through bankruptcy and emerged even more successful than before bankruptcy. And that's the spin that iHeart is taking. I mean, that's the stance that they're taking. And I think what happens is that stations, everybody wants to be the big kid on the block with all the toys. And at the end of the day, you could go out to whatever toy store and buy all the toys, but eventually that money's going to start to run out. And I think what happens is that media companies start to over-leverage themselves. And they want to buy everything, and they have all these stations, and now all of a sudden, in the case of iHeart, that banknote comes due. And oopsie, we don't have the money to cover the $2 million debt that we have to pay. So you file for bankruptcy. It doesn't mean that the stations will go away. It doesn't mean, but again, that I think puts sort of a pall on the business of radio, because everyone's looking over their shoulders wondering, what's this going to mean for me? Are there going to be layoffs? Are they going to sell off stations? How does this affect what we do on a daily basis? And all three of us, and I can only speak for myself, in terms of talent, you have to put that aside. You have to check that at the door and still be positive when you go on the air. Look, the business is the business, and we have to deal with it, but we really should not let that affect our personalities on the air. I mean, that's my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I want to touch on something you said. You mentioned starting out before the social media boom. How did you guys build an audience, a following on air without that? I mean, social media is very interactive. So how were you interactive, and how did people get in touch? Not how did people get in touch, but how did you build your audience before a world without Snapchat?
Well, appearances, a lot of personal appearances. I remember, I'm so glad for Google, because there was a time when I would be trying to get information about something as quickly as possible on the air, and I would actually call the library. I would actually pick up the phone and call the library and say, I need this fact, like now, because we didn't have access to all of that, that has become social media. Appearances, phone, working those phones, taking all the phone calls that you can, and just having as much of an interactive rapport with your listeners on the air. It's a lot easier now in a lot of ways, to reach out to people in all the different ways. When I'm on the air, and I'm sure you are as well, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, constantly. And when that first started happening, people would say, you're not paying enough attention to being on the air. It's like, no, you don't understand. This is as much a part of my job now as being on the air. It is. You can promote things coming up that we could never do before. Like in just a little bit, I'm going to be playing this song or whatever. Or put a video up to go along with it or whatever. So it really has allowed us to reach further. But I never thought about all the challenges, until you just asked that we did have before. You just had to work what you had at hand.
It's funny. I remember when I first started doing shifts on the college station, you would have to call a number to get weather reports. You'd actually have to call and wait for whatever the area code. I forget how they did it, but somebody would be there to dictate the weather reports, and that's how you got weather. Whereas now you launch the app on your phone and you got what you need for the next 7 days.
Debbie hit it on the head. I mean, when I started out, it was making those personal appearances. It was going to the Iowa State Fair and working the big top, and doing a remote broadcast. And that's how you built your listeners. That's how people, I don't know, in small market in the Midwest, it seemed like the listeners and the radio station just, gelled together, because at that time, that's all they had going on out there. There was no local television station. It was the local radio station. So whenever there was an event, and in our case, our station owner, general manager, also owned the movie theater in town and also owned the drive-in. So, you know,
Easy to get tickets.
it was
for-
easy. Yes, yeah, it was great. You know, you could get them for yourselves, and you know, and there would be the promotion, the Tuesday night movie of the week, and people would come out. They would win tickets, and you would meet your listeners that way.
Wow.
MC every concert that came your way, and as Paul said, movie screenings, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Everything.
My first internship, I worked in the promotions department at a station in New York, WPLJ, their hot AC station. We would go to gas stations. I mean, if the gas station was going to buy time, you'd go to a gas station, you'd go to a beer outlet. It didn't matter. I mean, wherever the people were going to be, Rye Playland, we were at Rye Playland for a day. That's what you did.
So that was probably back when, really, I mean, I'm sure you still get it, but really in the time of, oh, that's what you look like? Not knowing.
Yeah, there's no hiding now.
Yeah, you're all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we have to take a quick break, and I think we'll be back in a couple minutes. So stay there, and we'll have to be back with our guests.
We're right back.
Hooked to the double feature and you're on my mind. Return of the creature, the crawler from the subway line. You're always keeping me waiting, keeping me waiting for you.
Welcome back to Radio Row. Here with us are Philadelphia radio personalities Debbie Calton, Mike Vasilikos, and Paul Perrello.
All right, I'll ask the first audience question. This is submitted by Robert, who's here. How hard / easy is it to start your own radio channel / slow? I think this was more for me and Dan. You just talk to us after the show, and we'll set you up at WXP.
Yep, we'll hook you up.
So, after you get your own show on WXP, what do you think college radio broadcasters should do in order to try to get a job in that field?
Well, you have to be realistic. Are you talking about like getting a job after having a college radio show, or just getting into your own college?
I guess more how can someone display that they have the skills that they need for a job using their radio show as kind of their resume?
I see. Okay. Well, if you intend to continue on into a commercial career, you need to take that very seriously. You need to think about what you're doing there. You need to hone your skills. You need to work on your delivery. You can't be, I've heard, not so much recently, but sometimes you'll come across a college radio show where people are treating it just like a show out of their dorm. Don't do that. If you really want to learn, use everything you have available at your fingertips. Do everything, learn all the different operations of a radio station if you can, because you may not be able to jump into commercial radio into an on-air position. You may get your foot in, as you've done, with interning at a radio station, at my radio station, WMGK, by going into promotions or going into the engineering department. Learn everything you can to get your foot in the door. And then when you're there and you start proving that you're serious about it and that you're willing to do just about anything, then you'll be taken seriously, and you just might be able to get that coveted on-air job. It's difficult to start in a major market straight from a college radio station, but it's not impossible. We've had interns who have just graduated from doing what they're doing within the station, within the company stations. We have 4 stations here in Philadelphia, but then go on to become promotion directors or whatever. Incredible success stories, but you have to take it seriously.
Everything Debbie just said. Plus, the other thing I would add in is one of the first lessons I had was air checking yourself. If you're serious about being on the radio or on television, tape yourself and force yourself to listen to it. Some people, it's easy to do it, they have no problem. Other people, they hear their own voice and they cringe and they don't like it and it's uncomfortable for them. Fight through it. fight through it. You have to. That's the only way that you're going to get better. Even with people I know that have worked for years and years and years, air checking is still something that's really important to do. And the other thing, my mom's going to hate me for saying this, but be prepared to move. If you have to move, you have to move. I never thought I would leave New York. I got a job in Maryland. I got another job in Philadelphia. I left myself that flexibility to be able to move, to be able to do what I wanted to do, to land in a spot where I knew I can, you know, do what I wanted to do, and that's a big part of it. You may end up in Iowa. You don't know where you're going to end up. But if it's something that you love to do and you want to follow that passion, be open-minded about it.
Yeah, I would say be open-minded, have a thick skin, and I think in the broadcast journalism class, one of the things that I stressed was, you know, air checking is important. Sitting down with your supervisor, and he or she will probably say, you should change this, or don't hit this word that hard. On television, you got to watch, you know, hand motions, facial gestures, and a lot of people are not ready for the criticism. And I said, if somebody wanted to make $1 million, they write a book on how to take criticism, because no one really likes to hear about what you're doing wrong. But if you take that and turn it around and use that as a way to make you better, then you've got it. I mean, I remember early, you know, air check sessions with a program director, and I just like wanted to go home and, you know, and just say, yeah, maybe this isn't for me, because you really have to have a thick skin, because they will find everything wrong that's possible, but they're only doing it to make you a better broadcaster in the end. And at the very beginning, it's like, oh my God, I'll never get this. You know, I'm never going to be able to figure this out. But with time, you start to incorporate all of that constructive criticism, and I think ultimately it makes you a better broadcaster.
Yeah. Now, is there any additional skills that one might need? I know for WXP last year, we had a lot of technical issues, so and that can kind of keep going. They're kind of ongoing as well, too. Is there any additional skills, maybe such as technical, news writing, especially for Paul, any additional skills, especially maybe now, more so than in years past, that you might need now to really do well in the radio industry?
Yeah, like Debbie said before, you know, learn as much as you possibly can. The better the skill set that you could bring to a job interview, the better off I think your chances are. You know, if you know, early in my career, someone said, look, you might want to be a newscaster, but you might have to settle for doing overnights, an air shift. I don't want to be a disc jockey, I want to be a news person. So you really should know how to do everything, be very versatile. Look, if you are, you know, weak in the digital arts, like, you know, with television production, you really need to hone into it, because now it seems like every radio station has some visual component that's on the internet. You know, there are many morning shows in Philadelphia that while they're doing the show live on the radio, there are also, you know, a visual component. I mean, Preston and Steve, it's, you know, one of the most famous, you know, in the you know, in the Philadelphia market. Not only are they broadcasting live on the radio, but there's a whole visual component that goes along with it too. So if you excel at television production, that's another feather in your cap.
I found when I first went into radio, I was an English major in college for the short time that I spent there. But that helped a whole lot to write things out. A lot of people just want to, you know, go off the cuff on the radio, and a lot of people do, and I do that sometimes. But it's better to start early on being focused. And sometimes, if you looked at one of my music logs today, I write notes to myself constantly, because I want to frame in my mind how I'm going to present the thought. I look ahead and I want to frame the thought. And learning, and I know that I make grammatical mistakes here and there sometimes on the air, but the better command that you have of the language and how to present it, the more professional, obviously, you're going to sound. And again, just being able to write out a few sentences, having a structure so you get to your point, I think is a really good thing to hone early on. And as Paul said, and Mike also, you have to be willing. I think I worked 7 radio stations, or yeah, like within 6 years or something like that. I moved a whole lot. And you also have to be prepared to not always move, obviously, forward. You know, sometimes you might take a step into a bigger market, but you might be doing an overnight shift, or you might be doing a part-time shift. I never charted my career path, but the way that it unfolded was often just what I said. I would take a weekend job somewhere just to get into the next step up in a market.
So you just kind of perfectly segued into one of our audience questions that is in my hand somewhere. But sorry, whoever the audience member is, but they asked how hard or easy is it to climb up the ladder? Let's not beat around the bush, it's hard. So can you talk about, getting to the position you're at now? I mean, I guess you've talked about what happens on the air side, but there's an emotional part, there's parts that nobody can foresee, so can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, here I was, a South Philly kid, lived my whole life in the city, and had an internship, worked my way up through WEXP, and I thought, I'm taking the world by storm. I'm going to get hired. I didn't have high expectations. I knew I wasn't going to work on one of the big Philadelphia radio stations because I myself knew that I wasn't qualified to do it. But I thought I could land a job in Atlantic City, Harrisburg, Delaware. Rejection, rejection, rejection. And so I just figured, well, I'm just going to keep, pushing forward. And I got hired in the Midwest, so I had to go out to the Midwest. My goal was, when I graduated LaSalle, by the time I was 25, I would be working at a Philadelphia radio station. So I knew exactly where I wanted to be at the age of 25. Maybe that was a bit aggressive in my case. By the time I was like 22, I was back home working at a radio station, and then worked up through the radio station, overnight shift to morning drive to afternoon drive, became the news director. So I think it's okay. I mean, you don't have to have an idea where you're going or what you're doing, but never lose sight of where you ultimately want to be. And if you want to work at a major market station, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time to get there, but I think today one of the pitfalls is that when students graduate, they just want to sit in Jim Gardner's seat at Channel 6. Ain't going to happen. Not graduating any school and taking that dive into action news. It's not going to happen. You could say maybe 10 years from now I might be there and work at other markets outside, and ultimately make that your goal to work back in Philadelphia.
It's a tough industry. I mean, this is a tough industry. In my personal experience, I got really lucky, and I know I got really lucky, but along with that came some hard knocks along the way. I got a job that I was way out of my league getting, and it was basically because nobody else wanted to do it. I mean, they had a radio station that was brand new, a format that was brand new. They didn't have a budget. They had to just, whatever money was there, that was good enough for me. Like I told you, I worked free for the first 6 months or whatever it was, just because I wanted that job. But here you are, 22, 23 years old, and when somebody calls out, you have to go in and do that air shift. When labels are calling and they're trying to get the records on the air, I was on the other end. When the automation system goes down, you spend all night at the radio station with the software company trying to get the station back on the air. And my friends are down at the bar having fun, and you're pulling wires out and you don't even know where they go. You got to be willing to do really whatever it takes. But at the end of the day, if that's what you want to do, if that's what you love, if it's connecting people to who want to hear music or whatever your specific target is in broadcasting, sports, music, news, if that's what you want to do, then you make it happen.
I'm going to go back to something Debbi said earlier about commitment. And I tell this story, and a lot of people look at me and they're like, you did what? It was back in '83. There was a major snowstorm in Philadelphia, maybe '82, '83. And at the time I was working at WWDB in Philadelphia, was the talk station in Philly. And I was a part-timer. And I got the call like 4 o'clock in the afternoon that the overnight person wasn't going to be able to make it in. Would I be interested in coming and work the overnight Friday shift into Saturday? Sure, not a problem. I'd live near the Broad Street line. I could take the Broad Street line up to Broad and Walnut and get the bus to get me out to Conshohocken State Road. So I left the house maybe about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was snowing. It was really coming down. By the time I got off at Broad and Walnut, SEPTA had shut down. And here's one of those moments where it's like, what do I do? Do I go home? And my career probably would have been over. Or do I push forward? So I'm starting to think now, well, SEPTA's not running. I got to get out to City Avenue. I'm going to walk over to the Sheridan at that time, it was at 16th and JFK, because there's cabs. There's always a cab in front of a hotel. Not during this snowstorm, no cab. So I'm like, okay, I'm at 16th and JFK. I'm going to walk to 30th Street. 30th Street Station, train station. There's got to be a cab there, right? So I'm trudging through the snow. And I know I've still got plenty of time to get in for the midnight shift. Get to 30th Street, no cab. So again, what do? Do I throw my hands up in the air and say, hey, I gave it a shot? Right then and there, because the snow was coming down at a pretty decent clip, I noticed on the roadway, I saw headlights come up around 30th Street, and I knew it was a cab, and it was a cab. I jumped into the cab. Meanwhile, all these people are coming out of 30th Street now because they want that same cab. I'm like, no, I just said to the guy, I'll pay you whatever you want, just get me out to City Avenue. It was the worst cab ride I've ever had in my entire life. I mean, even being in New York, with all due respect to New York, and I made it well with enough time to get there for the midnight shift. So whenever it snows, my wife was like, do you really have to go to work? And I'm like, my career was made in the blizzard of '83. So
Wow.
This is, but I was committed. I was going to do it. Hell, high water, and even a blizzard, I was going to do this.
That's what it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here and actually go back to something we've talked about earlier, and that is the competition in the radio industry right now. And this will, I think, going to continue over to the next section a little bit. But I'll start the conversation now. And there's a little bit of a battle going on right now between radio and some other competitors like Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora. What are some of the strategies that radio stations today kind of employ to kind of really combat the music libraries, the podcasts that are just increasingly at the fingertips of, the world at large?
Well, the live and local factor is huge. It can't be underestimated. We can't compete with somebody's playlist on their phone necessarily, because that is so individualized. And in the case of MGK, we're a very structured classic rock station. A lot of the music has a higher repetition than somebody would have, on Spotify or wherever else they might go. But I can look out the window and say, it's sunny right now. Oh, but wait, is that right? Is that snow in this case in the last couple of weeks? Oh, it's snow, Or you can say, on the Schuylkill, I just heard that there's this overturned tractor trailer. Or, you can identify with your audience. And I think people time and time again tune in for that. That can't be replaced on, I remember when Sirius XM, when that first came in, satellite radio, everybody said, well, that's the death of terrestrial radio. Didn't affect us. It's there. We're aware of it. We're aware that there are all those specific channels out there, but it hasn't affected us because, again, people know that they can call on the phone. I'm going to answer that phone. I can look out the window. I can experience the same thing in real time that they're experiencing.
One of the reasons I got into radio, companionship. When you're in your car and Debbie's on the radio, that's your friend. That's your musical companion for that ride, wherever you're going to be. That's what radio's always sort of been about to me. And those services don't really offer that. The streaming platforms and stuff like that. I think it's important for radio stations nowadays to embrace a lot of the technology. When you look at Alexa and the iHomes and those things, those are moving faster than some stations can keep up with right now. In-home listening, that's a big impact. So I think stations have to strategize around that stuff. They have to strategize around podcasts. I do think that on-demand listening, when somebody wants to listen to a podcast about the Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street, they want to do it on their own time sometimes. So it's important stations have to embrace those things. But Debbie's right. Live, local, that essence of companionship, it goes a long way.
Yeah. And your stations are integrating some of those other aspects, right? You have a podcast?
I've been amazed at the explosion of the popularity of podcasts. But yeah, we all do them. We do them on a regular basis. Each month I'll record something. It's actually been a good memory-inducing exercise for me to think back. You know, we tell little stories about encounters that we've had, just experiences that we've had. People love them. They love them. And also, we're talking about Alexa. Instead of ignoring, you embrace that. We incorporate that into promotions. You know, it's not going to go away. It's what people are experiencing. You have to be a part of all the technology that is rapidly evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, we're going to go to a quick break. I'll be back in a few minutes. Don't leave. Stick around.
Welcome back to our final segment of Radio Row. With us are Debbi Calton from WMGK, Mike Vasilikos from WXPN, and Paul Perrello from CBS Radio. So we have a big question here. It's a little open-ended. So we have 3 representatives here from 3 pretty different types of radio companies. So we've got MGK, which is owned by Beasley Media, XPN, which is a AAA station funded by Penn, and then CBS Radio, which is a powerhouse. They're one of the big 6 that own 90% of all media, CBS. So we're curious about, like, A, the pros and cons of working for a big company versus a smaller company. What's the difference when you moved around from those different types of companies, and just your general experiences and just that kind of things.
Well, a big company, usually there's more money to work with for promotions. You know, you can take things up a notch. We were recently, well, about a year ago, I guess, we had been a Greater Media owned station for many years. That's when I first came into MGK in whatever year it was, 94. Greater Media owned the radio station, and so Beasley coming in, we were all, you know, what is this going to mean for us? What kind of changes is this going to be? And Greater Media, family-owned station, Beasley, a family-owned station too, but they're different. They're very different. We had to readjust our thoughts. We had in the shift between companies, there were a lot of people. You touched on something earlier about people being let go, you know, because cost effective, and for the sale to go forward, that had to happen. It had absolutely nothing to do with the jobs that the people were doing. It was just a bottom line cost, you know, saving measure. So that was kind of hard entering into a relationship with a new company, with seeing some of your, you know, coworkers leave like that. But we've adjusted. Again, a bigger company, and I don't know that Beasley necessarily, I don't know, like, right off the top of my head how many stations they own. There's money there, but again, they're a little bit more cautious about spending. But if you have a good argument for a promotion that's going to require a lot of money, right now we're doing a contest where $1,000 is given away 5 times a day. It's a company-wide contest, but we never have access to that kind of money to give away unless, you know, we had a big company and we were also doing it in conjunction with the other stations under the Beasley banner. So there's one instance.
Yeah. Entercom is doing the same thing. Entercom now owns CBS, so they're doing the same type of the bends on the 10s, where on our sister station, KYW, at 10 minutes past the hour, you could call in, but it's a nationwide contest. So, you know, KY and all the CBS stations are participating. It gives the listener the impression that I may have a chance to win by listening to KYW, but so may the people that are listening to the intercom stations in San Francisco and Washington and Tallahassee, wherever those stations are. So things I find are a little slower to take effect, or if you have an idea, they entertain the idea, but when you're independently owned, like More FM, WBEB, it's an independently owned radio station. They are consistently in their number 1 and number 2 stations, but even they are, to get a promotion approved or to do a remote broadcast, it takes a little bit more time and effort and thought that goes into it before maybe somebody would just jump on the gun when there wasn't really this fierce competition to get to be out in front with things. I think it takes a little more time to get things done today.
WXPN is sort of a different radio station in regards to some of these things. We're licensed to Penn. We're funded by our listeners. Over half of our budget comes from people actually picking up a phone and calling and donating $10 a month or $20 a month. So the nice thing is we're beholden to those listeners. Those listeners tell us they want new music and deep cuts, and we have the freedom to play all that stuff because we're beholden to them. I wouldn't quite call it a negative, but we don't have that financial, we don't have, the money is not there in the same sense of a commercial radio station. People don't want to donate $100 a year and have you spend it on a billboard. They want it to go back into the programming and back into that service that we're providing to them. So in terms of marketing and promotion, there's not necessarily as much money as a commercial radio station would have, but we have to get creative with the things that we do. We put on a 3-day festival every summer, and it's one of our biggest events, but it's also one of our biggest marketing tools to be over in Camden on the water for 3 days and to promote it, and creative collaborations with commercial entities and other community projects. It's a different, we're a different type of station. The advantages and disadvantages of it are kind of, are unique to us in some ways, but there's a lot of flexibility on the programming end, on the business end. It's a little different.
One other circumstance that has changed with us at MGK from going from Greater Media to Beasley, that was a privately owned company, and now we're publicly owned, so we have to think about shareholders too. So the bottom line sometimes shifts, and that definitely shifts in that scenario.
That's interesting.
Now, also going back to just playing on the diversity, the peer diversity that we have here, audiences. Now, that's been a topic, I think, in recent media kind of conversations. It can really be segmented. I think audiences now, and definitely in terms of news, I think in music as well, again, playing on the Spotify, Apple Music, other music vendors, things like that. How does that affect kind of that audience specificity affect maybe some stations that, if you're trying to branch out, will that negatively deter audiences from coming to listening to the station, or does that affect you guys in any sort of way?
Well, most stations have a target audience in mind. In the case of MGK, we're adults 25 to 54. However, we find that we have a lot on the younger end. 18 to 49, there's all these little categories when you break down the ratings, and then up to 65. So, but that's our core. That's where we try to get our most listenership, a balance of men and women. And so the music that we play goes to that segment for the most part. Also, as classic rock evolves, I think the standard is like 25 years it has to be out. So now you've got Guns N' Roses, you got Pearl Jam, you got all these different bands, and some of the 60s stuff sort of goes out. So your music evolves to also keep your audience evolving as well.
Yeah, I think at one time back in the day, there have always been radio formats from day one, but back in radios, perhaps if there was a golden era, everybody wanted to be number one with everybody. So we tried to be a full service station. You wanted to give them everything you possibly could because you wanted to be the number one in every category. Well, as ratings have changed and the way ratings are done, it seems to me that if you want to be number one with 12 plus, like in the case of maybe WIOQ, you could do that. You could call yourself number one amongst 12 plus. But then you have the Radio 1 group, which caters to the African American minority communities. So I think today radio stations have gotten away from wanting to be number one in every category, and now, as Debbi said, they have targeted the demographic as to what they want, who they want to serve. WIP, sports talk. They did Boffo at the box office with the Eagle season that just concluded with the Super Bowl. So they shot up to number one in the ratings because everybody was listening to the games on WIP. KYW is another station. These are all CBS Entercom stations now. KYW is sort of still trying to be a little bit to everybody, and I think they're starting to see their listenership sort of fade away and erode a little bit, because you can't have, on a station that is skewing to an older demographic, talk about the Twitter report, because most people listening to KYW are like, hey Mary, what's this Twitter thing all about? They're not getting it, and younger people, like everybody here, you're not listening to KYW, not even for school closing numbers anymore, because they're delivered directly to your phone. So in that case, they really got to figure out how they're going to move forward. They may not necessarily be the big behemoth to everybody. They may have to sort of fine tune where they want to go.
For XPN, I'm not going to lie, we look at numbers, we look at those age demographics and stuff like that, and they're very important to us. A lot of that, those measurements are used for sales, and because we're so dependent on members and people calling, it's a little bit of a different dynamic for us. We have 30,000 people that are members of the radio station. For us, moving that number up is really the most important thing. Our music is wacky, you know what I mean? Like, we play a lot of new music, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have a younger demographic.
Yes,
there are a lot of young people that listen to the radio station, but you may see our age actually tend to be a bit older. And the other thing is, they love the 70s. For some reason,
Yes,
the music of the 70s wins more than any other decade.
Yeah, I listened to this, Joe, and it definitely, I can confirm that, yeah. It's all good, though.
Hearing Dire Straits on your station. So do your interests as an individual, being just as a person, a radio host, a reporter, and the company that employs you, does it always seem to link up? And if it doesn't, how do you pick your battles without, getting canned?
Wow, who wants to take that
one?
one?
It's a delicate line that you got to, in the case of WPHT, it's a conservative talk radio station. So back in the day, I, as a journalist, came up through LaSalle knowing that we had to present a fair and a balanced, unbiased newscast. You had to present both sides of the story. Well, that's not necessarily the case these days, because if you're working on a conservative talk station, you sort of will skew your stories or pick and choose the stories that are pretty much going to support that mission of the radio station. So in the case of the current administration with President Trump, you're not necessarily going to highlight a story that's negative about the president, but you're going to lead with something that perhaps is positive. In the case of the whole, his attorney being they went into his office, took his records and all the other stuff. You got it. In true journalistic fashion, you have to report the story. But then you get other radio stations that will highlight that as the big story of the day, when we would probably include that story, but it wouldn't necessarily be the big story of the day. There might be something that's going on locally that perhaps takes a little more precedence over that. So you're in this constant battle between what do we go with, what do we not go with, where do we put this story as opposed to that story. And so it's a little more challenging today to toe the mission of the radio station, at least with talk radio, as opposed to presenting a fair and balanced newscast.
I've been very lucky to have good program directors at MGK who, although I know our consistency is definitely at the core of everything that we do, music-wise and just presentation. However, in the case of something, for instance, when Tom Petty died, threw us all off, you know, and so you're going to change your programming. I mean, Mike certainly can say that. You're going to adapt to what is going on. How far are you going to take it? You can push that, you know, sometimes I have had to push with my program director saying I'd like to take it a little bit further, or I'd like to introduce this element. And again, you're always aware it's a commercial radio station and not everybody feels the same way that you do. But I feel personally that if I have a good case to argue, I can go in and I'll be listened to.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Some hosts need encouragement to sort of push the envelope a little bit. Some you need to rein them in a little bit. Everybody's different. You know, personally, I'm pretty lucky too. XPN is very sort of open-minded to different ideas. You know, we have a music meeting every week. We have 4 people in there, but anybody can really submit ideas on the staff. If you hear something that you really like that you think is cool, we're really open. I mean, we get hundreds of CDs every week still, you know, and we go through everything, we listen through everything. So people have ideas, they throw them on the board. I mean, you just kind of have to be mature about it. Not everything that you throw on the table is going to be on the air the next day. But it's a pretty collaborative workspace. So.
And you work on air and off air, so you get to play double agent a little bit, right?
I'm sort of, I'll use some sports analogies. I'm like the utility infielder in baseball, or like a 6-man in basketball. Nice. Whenever somebody's sick or out or what, you know, that kind of thing. I'm the guy who pops in, and I host a new music show. So yeah, I do a lot. I like the behind the scenes stuff too. I really do. I like seeing everything, like constructing it and watching it happen. But being on the air is a ton of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, our time here is coming to a close, but I wanted to leave off with one question, and that is, we've heard a lot, but that is, last question is, what does the future of the radio industry look like? There's a lot of, as we've talked about, there's a lot of different outlets, a lot of technologies, a lot of different developing, you know, things going on in the industry. What do you think it looks like, it's going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years from now?
If I can insert something, and then with this latest net neutrality decision, do you think that'll play a factor in radio, either good or bad? You can't stream it, or they're most likely to listen to it terrestrially. So that's a lot to handle in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, I would say it's limitless. I mean, I think you could set your sights, and really there are probably more opportunities today for radio to thrive and survive than ever before. You know, they have written the obituary for radio since the 1940s.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, FM arrived, AM was dead.
Yep.
Television arrived, AM and FM was dead. You know, cable came. You know, so I think, you know, all of those you know, naysayers that say, you know, it's a dinosaur, it's an antique. So I mean, one thing I would stress is to stay on top of what's going on in the business. You mentioned net neutrality. You know, if a student or someone watching this doesn't know what net neutrality is, then I don't know how you can really move forward with even understanding what's going on in this industry. So you really have to stay on top of everything. But I think really the future is promising. It's limitless for radio.
Great.
I agree.
Yeah, you know, to what Debbie mentioned earlier, embracing some of these new technologies and stuff like that. You know, we might not be turning a dial like we did for a lot of years. We may be pushing buttons or saying, you know, play WMGK, but I think radio can still can absolutely prosper. Yeah.
Well, that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
We want to thank all 3 of you for coming out. We really appreciate you, spending your time with us. I want to thank Tanya Ellis for helping us do all this, the crew who volunteered their time, and of course our studio audience who was nice enough to insert some questions. So that's it for Radio Row, and be sure to check all these guys out on social media, and have a great day.
Don't forget to listen to WXP too.
Thank you.
Thank you.